Hello, class. This is Coach McGee here, and this week we are going to be talking about the frontier wars of Texas from 1860 to 1875. You can see in the timeline frontier conflicts in Texas. I want you to examine the timeline and make some predictions about the possible significance of each event. As you see, in 1862, the Frontier Regiment is created. Then in 1864, you had the first Battle of Adobe Walls had take place. Then in 1867, the Treaty of the Medicine Lodge Creek is signed. In 1869, the Quaker peace policy is attempted. And I guess no peace has been resolved. The raid at Salt Creek had occurred in 1871. The Buffalo Soldiers were created in 1873 in Texas. And then the second Battle of Adobe Walls occurs in 1874. Let's get your brain working. Can you think of a time in history when different groups became involved in wars over territory or land? Why do these groups become involved in conflicts over land? Think about the differing points of view surrounding these disputes. What about conflicts today over land? Eminent domain, the process in which the government can take your property for the good of the community. Why it matters now. The battles that ended Native American control of West Texas began during this period. Many Native Americans were removed from their lands and forced to live on reservations. The end of the frontier conflicts marks the passing of a way of life for many Native Americans. America's longest war. It continues to be fought for almost 400 years. Frontier wars are a clear example that history is always a relevant discipline, and it tends to repeat itself in some shape or form. Take a look at this picture. See if you can make some inferences about the frontier conflicts. How did this U.S. Army deal with this kind of enemy? The horse-mounted cavalry, traveling in groups from dozen to several hundred men, this point to apply consistent pressure. It became clear that Americans weren't going away. This would lead to surrender and represent the last of the American Indian generations that fought the U.S. government. Conflicts prior to the U.S. Civil War. In the mid-1800s, conflicts over land began in Texas. After the United States annexed Texas in 1845, many new settlers arrived in the state to live along the frontier. This wave of immigration pushed the frontier line further west into territory where native Texans had lived for hundreds of years. Tensions would arise as two groups competed for same resources and land. What was the frontier? For Anglo-Americans, the frontier was an area beyond the limits of settlement. During the Civil War era in Texas, the frontier was most part of West Texas and still home to nomadic Native Americans. Raiding frontier settlements was the method of defense for the natives. And then you had two cultures that clashed. As settlers continued to push toward the west, building towns and communities, native Texans began to feel anger towards them and began to fight back. For years, federal troops had guarded the frontier against native Texan attacks. When Texas seceded from the Union in 1861, United States troops were withdrawn, leaving settlers almost defenseless. Some Texans expected Confederate troops to protect their frontier against native tribes, but the Confederate soldiers were needed to fight in the Civil War. Battles east of the Mississippi River and Texas settlers became easy targets. So Comanche and Kiowa tribes posed as their biggest threat to settlers. Okay. Cynthia and Quanah Parker. One Comanche leader who opposed Anglo settlement on Comanche lands was Quanah Parker. He fought hard against settlers and military tried to expand into Comanche territory. His Anglo mother, Cynthia Ann Parker, was kidnapped by the Comanche in 1836. She was raised by the Comanche and adopted the culture and became the wife of Chief Pettinacona. Quanah Parker became one of the most popular Comanche leaders of the time. He even helped push the boundary of the frontier back 50 to 100 miles in some places. Families abandoned their settlements and lived in communal forts called Fort Nutt. The first Battle of the Adobe Walls. In 1864, bands of Comanche and Kiowa raided wagon trains that were crossing their land to supply troops. At the end of the raids, more than 300 troops led by Colonel Kit Carson, a well-known frontier scout, marched south to attack Comanche and Kiowa in the winter camps. They set up two canyons at the Adobe Walls. There were abandoned trading posts to the south of the Canadian River. Despite being attacked by thousands of natives The troops repelled the attacks. The next day, the troops retreated to New Mexico and burned hundreds of Kiowa lodges and winter food storage locations. Why is this significant, you ask? The natives were overwhelmed by the loss and signed a peace treaty. Relations with natives and Texas colonists was peaceful until the end of the Civil War. Conflict continues. This is after the Civil War, which is 1865 and on. Frontier conflicts continue. When the Civil War ended in 1865, federal troops returned to Texas. Many thought the troops would go back to defending the frontier, but instead troops were there to restore the federal authority to aid in the Reconstruction. Many soldiers also didn't care to protect the same people they had fought against in the war. This gave Native Americans the chance to fight back. From 1865 to 1867, natives took the lives of 162 Texans, wounded 24, and captured and kidnapped 43 in raids. The Texas government asked federal authorities to send aid to defend the frontier once again. The Treaty of Medicine Creek Lodge. In 1867, the U.S. government sent agents to arrange a peace treaty. They met the Comanche, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Kiowa Apache chiefs at Medicine Creek Lodge in Kansas. The treaty established 3 million acre reservation located in the Indian Territory, later to be Oklahoma. The U.S. government promised to provide land, food, and supplies to the reservation. The natives promised natives would move onto the reservation and stop the raids against settlers. Failure of the Medicine Lodge Creek Treaty did not bring peace to the Texas frontier. Some natives refused to move onto the reservation because it would restrict their lifestyle. Quanah Parker rejected the treaty completely. The government did not provide enough food or supplies for the reservation. Also, buffalo hunters and outlaws were allowed to enter and hunt on the reservation. Without enough food to eat, some natives left the reservation to hunt, and some left to raid settlements, breaking their end of the treaty. Buffalo soldiers. By 1868, the U.S. Army again occupied forts built before the Civil War. Soldiers patrolled the frontier to watch for raiding parties of natives. By 1873, many of the forts in Texas were guarded by African American troops known as Buffalo Soldiers. Most were former slaves who had joined the Army when they were freed. The Buffalo Soldiers carried a different tasks like scouting, mapping, building roads, and patrolling the frontier to protect settlers against raids by natives. Although they played an important role in guarding the frontier, many Buffalo Soldiers faced discrimination from settlers they protected. They were in the South right after the Civil War. Why are they called Buffalo Soldiers? Well, the name was given by them by Native Americans who respected their bravery and thought their woolly black hair resembled them like a buffalo. Hence, Buffalo Soldiers. War on the Plains. Several attempts at peace on the frontier before 1870 had failed. The U.S. government decided to do away with the peace treaty, instead to remove all Native Americans by forcing them onto reservations. The government also worked with Texas Rangers to defend the Texas frontier. The raid at Salt Creek, also known as the Warren Wagon Train Raid. The band of Kiowa, led by Chief Santana, attacked many wagon train on the same road that William T. Sherman had just traveled. After hearing about this, Sherman decided to punish the Native Americans who traveled to the reservation, arrested the leaders of the raid, and sent them back to Fort Richardson in Jacksboro, Texas for trial. As a result of the raid at Salt Creek, the Army enacted more aggressive policy to remove natives from the frontier and onto the reservation. This included mass killing of buffalo herds and forced native tribes to leave the frontier. The Red River War, which also included the Second Adobe Walls Battle and the Polladura Canyon Battle. Native Americans fought back against the killing of the buffalo, which Anglos were hunting even on their reservations. On June 27, 1874, Quanah Parker led more than 700 Comanches and Kiowa into battle against the camp of buffalo hunters at the old Adobe Wall trading post, which was the second battle of Adobe Walls. The hunters were outnumbered but their long-range rifles allowed them to fend off the attacking natives. Angered, the tribes increased the raids on settlers. General Sheridan, who supervised Reconstruction in Texas, came up with a plan to end native resistance. He sent columns of troops in 5 directions to trap the Native Americans in their winter camps in Polladura Canyon. They would be forced to surrender or be killed. Battles continued for months. Troops burned native villages and food supplies and killed natives' horses. The beginning of the end. The losses was disastrous for the Comanche and Kiowa. They succumbed to the loss of their environment as they knew it. The end of the buffalo would put an end to their raids and the native way of life. They forced onto the reservation, and the destruction of the buffalo population kept them on the reservations, dependent on government agents for food. Years later, the government would again break their promise. Most of the reservation land was open to settlers. This resulted in the breakup of the Kiowa, Comanche, and other tribes. The end. Thank you.